Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on 28th of October. There we have a lot of updates, so let's start. We can say that there are the same updates as we saw yesterday and the day before, but with the different numbers. But before we start about the front lines, let's say that according to the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation Shoigu, today he had a report. He gave a report to the President of Russian Federation, Putin, and he told that the mobilization process in Russian Federation has ended. As a result of the mobilization process, the Russians managed to mobilize around 300,000 soldiers. Also, he added that something around 82,000 are already on the front lines, from Kherson till Kupinsk, all along the front lines, already 82,000 soldiers, and that's a lot, believe me. And around 2018 soldiers are still in the training centers. So, but I believe that the Russians started their mobilization process on the 20th of September. In a month, they managed to deploy around 182,000 soldiers, as we discussed during the mobilization process. If you remember that the Russians will try to deploy like the first 100 in a month, the second 100 by the somewhere in November, and the third 100 they will try to develop in January or something, or maybe in February. Who knows? Don't forget that the Russians deployed around 9,000 soldiers in the territory of Belarus. But anyway, as you can see, 100 soldiers are enough to stop the Ukrainian offensive operation. Because as soon as the Russians managed to deploy their forces, we see now that the Ukrainians don't have any progress at any point of the front line. Of course, the mobilization process is not the only factor that played the main job in this situation. Of course, we understand that the main game changer in this situation, there are three factors that did the main job that allowed the Russians to turn the break situation. First one, of course, is mobilization. Second one is, of course, the Iranian drones, or it's the Russian drones, but let's call them Iranian because like everybody understand that maybe these drones are not produced in Iran. Maybe they are sending just the parts, and the Russians are using these parts. They have their own production anyway. Iranian drones is the second factor, and the third one is reducing of Ukrainian energy facilities. As you can see, the Russians planned these things, I believe, for a very long time, and now they have a lot of success, and now all these three factors not just stop the Ukrainian counteroffensive operation. Furthermore, at some parts of frontline, the Russians started their own counteroffensive operation, and they managed to return, let's say, a few towns that were taken by the Ukrainians during the previous counteroffensive operation. Now let's talk about the front lines. And if we're talking about the Kupinsk front line, as you can see, this map hasn't been updated. There are no updates on this map. But anyway, the Ukrainians were trying to attack the Russians in direction at the same towns, so direction of Kislinka, Kotlarovka, in this area. But the Ukrainians were defeated one more time in this area. Let's take a look at the Russian sources map. I'm talking about this area. Kuzyumovka, these towns, the Ukrainians, Novosilovska, in this area, the Ukrainians were trying to attack, but and Kislinka on all along these front lines, but they were defeated, and the Ukrainians lost around 150 soldiers and something around 18 armored vehicles, including tanks, trucks, cars, and so on. And the most important thing is that the Russians reported that Ukrainians had some bridgehead near town Novoselsk, somewhere there. Maybe they had some trenches, maybe they had few blocks in Novoselsk. I didn't have any updates about this situation. But anyway, as a result of the previous clashes, the Ukrainians lost the bridgehead near Kuzyumovka, and they were forced to step back in direction of Berestove. And now the Ukrainians are there. As you can see, the Russian source map has been updated. They moved the front line a little bit to the west, this line. So there are heavy clashes in this town. If we're talking about Liman, the same situation. This is the gray zone. One day the Russians attacks, another day Ukrainians attacks. Today, as I understand that Ukrainians attacks almost every single day, but with a different success. And as a result of today's attack, the Ukraine lost around 50 soldiers and something around 7 armored vehicles, and they were trying to develop their offensive operation in the direction of Chervonopopovka, this town. But for now, they still couldn't establish control over this town, so we'll see what is going to be next. If we're talking about the area between Bakhmut and Seversk, there are no changes in this area. I believe that the Wagner stopped, as you can see. I'm not saying that they're not storming or pushing. As we discussed, Ukrainians moved their 62nd Mechanized Brigade in this area. This is very fresh forces, also some special forces. So I believe that now the Wagners have a lot of job to do, because before storming first they need to reduce the Ukrainian forces, to demoralize them and so on. So for now they're on the same positions, and I believe that maybe the Russians won't develop their offensive operation in Bakhmut. For now I believe that they need to do something with to stick to the plan, the previous plan, and first to get control over Kurdyumovka, Zaryanovka, Opotna. There were very heavy clashes in this town, and so we'll see what is going to be next. But for now, the front line, we can say, is very hot but stable. Now we're moving to Donetsk. As you can see, there are a few icons in this area, and one of the most important one is there is icons saying that the road control. Today we got, let's say, the second confirmation of the fact that the Russians got control over a part of Vadiane and the road, this one road that connects Avdiivka and, let's say, Peski. This one, not the entire road, but at least this cross. And today we got the second confirmation, because the day before we got confirmation that the Russians entered the south part of Vadiane, that by this attack the Russians managed to split this area in two parts. Let's take a look at the Western Sources map, and if we take a look at this map, we're gonna see that there are no changes in this area. But let's update this map and try to understand and analyze what's going to be next, and let's try to understand how much time the Ukrainians have and to hold Opotna. So according to the Russian sources, we understand that the Russians, for now, at least for now, they control something like this. They control. I will not update the part of Vadiana that locates it on the north part of the river. Let's update just the south part. And the Russians are storming these days Pervomayskaya. So I believe that the Russians control something like this at this moment. And this is not some kind of a gray zone. Maybe, let's say it's a gray zone, but it's very gray zone that is more dark zone than the gray zone, because even it's more red zone than the gray zone. But the Russians believe that more than 90% of this territory, the Ukrainians still have possibility maybe to send some commandos, Reco in combat, but with all these attempts ends with the heavy losses. Let's take a look at the Russian source map. As you can see, we have updated the Western source map almost at the same level as the gray zone goes in this area. So this is the situation, and as you can see, the Ukrainians have at least they have just one final checkpoint in this area, and this checkpoint has the name of Opotna, this one. So the Ukrainians are still there, and this is the focal point, this is the focal area, and this is very fortified positions. This area is very well easy, not easy, very nice to defend, because there is water barrier from at least three sides. The first from the south, from the west, from the north area. But there is one problem, and the problem is that the Russians have their position in this area. These Russians are there, and from this area the Russians have established fire control over this road. So I believe that the Ukrainians do have possibility to achieve some supply and support from Avdiivka, but I believe that the main road that Ukrainians in Opotna uses for their support is this one. So this is the only road. This is the only road, and to tell the truth, from anywhere, from any position, the Russians have established fire control. So we can say that Ukrainians in Opotna has been encircled, or at least find themselves in operational encirclement. They do still have possibilities to supply and support, but I believe that we can start counting days before Opotna is going to fall. And as soon as Opotna falls, I believe that we may say that the final battle for Avdiivka has started. Of course, the Ukrainians do have a lot of very nice position, at least in this area, because this is a residential area with not just the small buildings, but it's like 9, 10, 12 floors, big buildings, where the Ukrainians, using this area, the Ukrainians are able to pin down the Russians all along the front line. But the Russians don't need to storm this the residential area from Opытное. They need this Opытное just for one purpose, like to push the Ukrainians to move their eyes from this position, and of course to protect the Russians' flank while attacking Severное, this area. And for now, this is the most important area, because yes, the Ukrainians achieved success in Kharkiv area, they achieved success in Kherson area, but Avdiivka it's even more than Mariupol these days. Avdiivka, we can say, is the heart of all Donbas arc operation. This is the heart, and if the Ukrainians loses Avdiivka, believe me, this is going to be a very big media damage to the Ukrainians. Very big media damage. And according to the situation we can see right now, I believe that Ukrainians are losing. Furthermore, don't forget that the Russians do have forces in this area. They're split by some forces in Novobakhmutovka, but something tells me that these days the Russians are planning to activate the same parallel mode with the Opытное operation. They will activate in Novobakhmutovka, and the Russians, they need to complete their operation in Первомайское and Nitайлово. So this is the towns that the Russians need to take. Let's like update them. Nitайлово, Первомайское, Opытное, and Северное, Opытное, and Novobakhmutovka. Novobakhmutovka is in the north, just one purpose, to let's call it like to protect the flanks and to have a shortened front line and so on, and to be able to like not to have surprises before attacking and cutting the Ukrainians the final supplied railroad, this one. So this just for these purposes. But we're talking about that, and the Russians are moving exactly in this direction, because today we got a report from both sides, from the Ukrainians and from the Russians, that the Russians are getting closer and closer to the town by the name of Nivolskaya. And this is like, let's say, another town that the Russians need to get control over. And we can say that at least 50% of Donetsk North defense operation or offensive operation will be completed. But for now we have what we have. And Vadiana is very important, and the Russians have a real bridgehead in this area to develop and to complete maybe even this year. At least, or to start this year, by the end of this year, the Avdiivka offensive operation. Why I'm saying that if we're talking about the global scope, the Ukrainian conflict, I'm saying that on the winter period, the Russians, we won't see any offensive operation, but if we're talking about Avdiivka, I'm saying that the Russians are not planning to stop during the winter period. I'll explain to you. First of all, if you were following the Donetsk airport battle that took place in 2014-2015, you need to understand that in 2014 and 2015 the Russians achieved significant success exactly at the winter period, from November till February. So that was the best period for them when they achieved significant success. And why that, I will explain to you. First of all, the main problem for the Russians while attacking Donetsk airport was that they didn't have any possibilities to get as close as possible to this town and to establish their position there because of many factors, because of artillery and so on, artillery like pin down attack, counter-offensive operation and so on. But during the November, December and January, there are a lot of days, not just days, but weeks in a row when there is a very big, I don't know how to say it in English, very massive fog, real fog, natural fog, and it's the best barrier for the Russians to attack the Ukrainians, because I remember those days, and as soon as fog started, the Russians got control over the airport during the next, they got some position there during the next weeks. days, and during the next months they managed to clear this town completely. So somewhere in December, in January, there are going to be a lot of foggy areas. So there was so much fog though you won't be able to see nothing in front of you for 10 meters. This is exactly this area, and it's some kind of natural behavior of the nature in this area. I can't explain that, but it's and this situation we're going to see this upcoming winter. So there are going to be a lot of fog, and it will be the best situation for the Russians to start offensive operation, because the Ukrainians, they won't see the Russians. They won't be able to spot them, they won't be able to pin them down with artillery, and it will give opportunity for the Russians to get as close as possible to the Ukrainian defense orders. So we'll see the winter, and we'll see this fog time, so let's wait a little bit. It's not much time left before these days. Now we are moving to the south, and today the Russians reported the situation near the Avdiivka tactical bridgehead. This one more time. As you can see, they didn't start doing another circle, the Ukrainians, of counter-offensive operation, like every single day, every single new territory, and now they're started from the very beginning. And the Russians reported that Ukrainians were attacking in this area, and as a result of those attacks, the Ukraine lost around 30 soldiers and something around 4 armored vehicles. I believe that it wasn't a very big attack. To tell the truth, I can't imagine and understand what the Ukrainians were trying to do with that, but anyway, they were attacked, they were defeated, and were forced to step back. If we're talking about Orekhov-Gulai Polye front line, there are no changes in this area at all. And furthermore, there were no updates about any kind of accumulation of the forces or regrouping or so on. So I believe that for now there are no changes. Now we are moving to Nikolaev-Kherson bridgehead. There are very heavy clashes there. The Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours, the Ukraine lost around 180 soldiers and something around 14 armored vehicles. But the Russians reported, and I saw one important difference between this attack that the Russians reported the previous 24 hours and the previous days. And the most important one is that before the Russians reported that the Ukrainians made another attempt of counter-offensive operation in direction of Petykhatki, Sukhanova, in direction of David Brod in this area, in direction of Bruskinska, and as a result of those attacks, the Ukrainians lost their soldiers. But this report, the Russians mentioned that they attacked not the Ukrainian forces in this area. There were no counter-offensive operation from the Ukrainian side. The Russians reported that they attacked the Ukrainian reserves. So during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians were doing some kind of maybe rotation process, maybe regrouping, maybe they were planning to move more forces to the front line to start any offensive operation in this area. And the Russians attacked not the let's say the line of the clashes, but they attacked the Ukrainian reserves, and 180 soldiers is the losses among the Ukrainian reserves and the forces who weren't on the front line. And this is very interesting update, by the way. Furthermore, the Russians reported they managed to destroy some kind of Mi-80 helicopter in this area. The Ukrainians from their side were attacking the dams, the pontoon bridges, the dam in this area, so they were trying to destroy the Russians' pontoon bridges, their supply and support roads. And the Russians reported they managed to shut down some HIMARS rockets. Just a few of them managed to get the target. So we'll see. Furthermore, today we got, let's say, the first confirmation of the fact that the Russians, the authorities from Kherson, reported about the complete of the mass evacuation process. Now they still support and supply civilians who decide to leave this area by themselves. But if we're talking about evacuation as a mass process, this process has ended. If we're talking about the Ukraine, we understand that the Russians during the previous hours attacked this area with their drones, with their missiles. We know that the Ukrainian authorities started the very saving process, energy saving process there, and now people from Kiev, they don't have electricity for many hours a day, and we understand that this picture, we can see this picture all over the Ukraine. It's like almost November, so the situation in Ukraine is not very good. But as you can see, more and more sources from many sides are saying that the Russians are trying to force the Ukrainians to start negotiation process. The Russians and the world, the authorities from all over the world are trying to force the Democracy Party in the United States of America to start negotiation process with the Russians. But for now, Zelensky doesn't want to start anything, or at least he's just playing the role that was given to him by the United States of America. Who knows? But anyway, soon we're going to understand everything. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you that you condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.